So thrilled to be in this community this evening. What a challenging week, but what an opportunity to be in the space together. So I'm thrilled to be here tonight to share my work, my journey, and to hear the urgent work that we're going to be creating together. So I thought, in lieu of our title today, Defiant Dialogue, I would like to read the opening of a play called La Paloma Prisoner. This play is part of a larger play cycle, so I'm dedicating my life to writing 33 plays, one for each Latin American country, and its relationship with the United States, all with female characters as its lead. And so I'll just give you just a little bit of context for what you're about to hear. You're about to hear the opening of the play. The main character, La Paloma, she is incarcerated in a jail named Buen Pastor in Bogota, Colombia. And she interacts with an ensemble of women from the ages of 19 to 65. But I'll dive right into the reading, and then we can go more into the process right after I read. Act 1, Scene 1, at Rise. The stage is dark and bare. From the right corner in the ceiling, a small white light starts to appear. An immense sound of a bird's wings flapping is heard. Then an even louder sound of a bird screeching is heard. Suddenly, La Paloma sits in a steel chair. She's in a spotlight created by a huge light from the prison yard. Some say I can fly. On nights like these, I can. Me llamo La Paloma. They call me Paloma because I'm gentle and only want peace, flying to other dimensions. The bones of my wings sprout out from my ass, almost breaking my spinal cord every time. All those men I killed, I did it out of peace. I'm pretty femme to be a Butch Dyke serial killer. You know, it's funny. You know, I tried killing off anything that wasn't good in the world. Well, men, of course, and they stick me in a place full of women. My dream. Malparidos tontos. I love pussy. And you know why I love cuca? You're probably thinking it's because I'm trapped in walls with only women, and that eventually I gave in. Gave in to wanting love, and needed to feel the touch of love. Intimate love. The kind of love that has you revealing your childhood terrors, kissing in alleyways and making promises to a stranger. That kind of love, true love, can only be found here, in a prison, my personal freedom. Soy colombiana, and like any good Colombian, amo el pan. Soft, wet, warm bread. I used to knead the dough in my mother's bakery and imagine nipples on that dough. I would leave my imprints on the pasty live dough, satisfied in how I had changed the composition of that bread forever. One day, my mother caught me with raw dough in my mouth, salivating on the counter. She slapped me and forced me to start the bread again. And I did, chanting my own made-up incantation when the water, yeast, and flour hit together. I could create women. That's how it felt when I first touched a woman. There was nothing softer, warmer, or wetter than my mouth on her life nipple. El sabor de mujer. I can destroy too. Soy hija del sistema. I'm a daughter of this system. I am loved and hated in this family of steel. They watch me here closely, so closely. They time how long it takes me to shit, to piss, to breathe. They say that I'm still out there, killing those rapists, hijos de puta. That somehow From behind this steel, I fly upon them at night, on their way home, and slice them down the stomach with my nails. Lights immediately go to black. The sound of wings flapping returns. La paloma is gone. End of excerpt. Okay. Wow. Yeah. So this was the opening of this piece. I'm seeing so many people. I see Bernice. I see Marilyn. I see Fran. I'm just saying hi to everyone. Thank you so much. Can we read the rest of the play? Well, we'll have to do a reading or something to see if we can read the rest of the play. So yes, just to go a little into the history of Paloma, this is a piece. I always say that I didn't write Paloma Prisoner wrote me. Because this piece has been informed by the last 20 years of my life, my work in incarcerated spaces, and also just the journey of developing this play over the last decade has took me to 4 different countries. You know, so this play has really had a life, and it was supposed to have a world premiere off Broadway in March, but it was unfortunately canceled due to COVID. And so we are regrouping, but I always say, you know, Paloma will find a way. It's found a way to live all these years. I'll talk a little bit about, I guess, how I entered into the space of La Paloma Prisoner, and it absolutely has to do with my trajectory as a theater artist. But I want to just focus also on the mentees and focus that my work is as a young writer. The first concept that I understood that females had power was when I was living in a domestic violence shelter. When I was, I think, the age of many of the mentees, I was 14, 15 years old. And I had no one had ever asked me what I wanted to achieve in life. No one had ever asked me that question. And so when I was in this domestic violence shelter, we had these storytelling circles. And so it reminds me of actually what we're doing right now is circling and gathering. And I didn't quite fully understand and grasp the power of storytelling until I was in that circle with women that were a variety of ages, you know, from, you know, children to women in their 60s and 70s that were now starting a life on their own. And hearing the stories of other women that were also experiencing domestic violence really inspired me to lean into, storytelling. What is this power of telling one story and hearing each other's stories? And before that, I didn't really have an introduction into the world of arts, right? Or that would be a place for me. But I did become incredibly interested in that moment in narrative. And I realized at that moment that unless I started writing my own stories, that someone else was going to write my story for me. And that's what I felt like when I was 14 to 15, right? I felt like I was being pulled in one direction. And then if I didn't actually pull back and start writing my own narrative and the stories that I heard in those circles, I wasn't going to be able to actually shape my reality. So that's when I started to become really fascinated by theater making, and I entered theater making as a performer, and quickly realized, you know, as a young theater artist, I did not see any roles for Latinas or Latinx women, and so that prompted me as a young person, 15, 16 years old, I started to write narratives. And in my undergrad, I was fortunate enough to go to an undergrad at University of Florida, in a subsection in Miami, that I was able to explore writing, I was able to explore dramaturgy, I was able to explore directing, and so I wasn't limited in one space. But what was limiting, and what I didn't realize at the time, that I was in a way being forced to frame my own narrative and my experience in all of these other predominantly white plays. And I was mastering all these techniques that ultimately did not reflect my culture. Even though I had a dean who was Peruvian, and we did a lot of experimental work, and but it wasn't inherently political, and it didn't really address the narratives of women, because in undergrad I studied playwriting, but we didn't study female playwrights. We weren't centering the female voice. And so that's when I started to write plays. And you'll see, I guess, the language that you hear in Paloma, and I'm sorry that I didn't give the content warning for some of the language, but the first full-length play that I wrote, I was accused of being vulgar. And the older white gentleman at the time, who had, I guess, accepted me into this program, said that I was vulgar, that my work was vulgar. And so I really started to grapple with that, and I knew at the time I was being shut down. Like, they didn't want to hear women have this defiant voice, but I was like, wait a minute, but I'm reading a play by David Mamet, and he has all this language, and he's winning Pulitzer Prize, right? So I was like, how is it that this male writer is using this language, and yet when I'm, having this kind of agency, and the women in my plays were, I guess, quote unquote, what this professor said to me was that they were very masculine, that the women were very masculine, and that they were saying and doing things that were incredibly, sorry, but also, yeah, right. And I had the opportunity to interview David Mamet when I was 19. And when I was 19 years old, I said, okay, I got an opportunity to interview him. And I asked him, what do you want from the audience? What is your hope to have a relationship with the audience? And he said, oh, I just hope they get up and leave. And I said, yeah, that pretty much sums up your entire career. You don't think about the audience. You don't think about the messaging in your work, right? Like, and I thought to myself, all of these women in undergrad were performing in that material, right? And that we were conforming to that kind of, patriarchy inside of playwriting. And then I'll be completely open and honest with you too. I had also a Me Too moment with professors in undergrad, and not really knowing how do you navigate that as a young person when you want to be creative, and you're there to, build yourself up. It wasn't talked about the way that it's talked about now. I mean, it was really scary that you just didn't quite know what was happening, and it was happening to a lot of the young, my young female colleagues at college, and it wasn't until several years after that I actually realized what had happened and how limited, or even that my professional reach had been limited by what the culture that some of the male professors had created in undergrad. And it starts to limit what you think you can achieve professionally. So it's like that was a huge barrier. And I think for me, what changed is I went back into circles with women after I got out of this space. And it was a queer male dancer that asked me to go to a maximum security facilities to work with him, and he said, Raquel, come with me. The women have been dancing for 8 years, but they've never written anything. Could you come in and build work? And I said, oh, absolutely, I'd love to come. So this was the transformative moment in my life, when we started to because the body of the women who had been incarcerated for, some of them had been there for 33 years, 7 years, 13 years, some of them had life sentences. Their bodies were already talking. But then how do we start to have a physical language and start to place it with this other kind of like defiant language? Like now, how can you put your narrative into language and in your body? So this is the journey we started to go on. And so you'll see the characters in La Paloma range from the age of 19 to 65, because it was a spectrum of women that we had in the room. And we worked together for almost a year, and it was truly, really transformational to be back in the space with women sharing our stories. And then we started to build dialogue, and several of the women spoke about, you know, what led them into incarceration. But when I learned that women were tried 3 times harder for the same actions that men were committing right across the street, because the male facility was literally in the same, it was adjacent. It was like there was a parking lot that divided the 2 facilities. And that the action that women had committed were, you know, what a man would come in and out of for 3 months, a woman was doing 13 years. And so I realized, I said, wow, we must center the realities of women. So that particular residency changed my life. When I asked the women, I said, who do you want to be in the audience? Going back to David Mamet, when he said, oh, I don't care what the audience does, right? I think it's a very masculine thing to say, that where you don't think about the impact of your work and your words, right? What kind of impact do you want your work to have, right? Are you healing? Are you adding to the destruction? Which I think that's what his work does. And so I asked the women, who do you want to be in the audience of this presentation? And they said, we want our friends, our family, but we want the lawyers, and we want policy. We want people who can change policy. And so we started to gather this diverse audience. And from that audience, they brought in women who had also were incarcerated, but some of them had been catatonic and had not spoken for years. When I tell you that when the women started to perform their monologues, the women that hadn't spoken for many years started to wake up, and some of them started getting up from their chairs, and they started to speak, and they started to scream, and because they saw themselves reflected back. I think that's what they saw. They said yes, people were being triggered, but I think it's also like the mirror of your own narrative being reflected back to you. And so several of the women that had life sentences over the course of a year and 2 years had their life sentences reversed, because there were policymakers and there was lawyers and there were, you know, advocates in the audience. And so I said to myself, oh, this is what theater, right? What theater making, this is really the not only the potential really, but the purpose of theater making. So I think I approach writing every play as if I'm in a circle with women, and I'm hearing stories, but I'm also very conscious of reflecting back the narratives of women and not leaving us in a place of defeat. I was very exhausted by watching these narratives where at the end women were just defeated, or how many Hollywood narratives do we see that women are just dead at the end, right? I was really tired of women having no agency, and so I, started to craft narratives where, quote unquote, La Paloma prisoner starts to take action against the rapist of Bogota, right? She starts to reverse the damage against herself, but she's also in solidarity with other women. So I just want to open it up to if there's any questions and dialogue, because I've spoken for a long time now. So. How did you find the courage to speak up in an environment that was not supportive of you? Valentina. So where did I learn to find courage? I actually started to do that on the street when I was being catcalled. That's where I really first started writing my first monologues. And because I entered into an aggressive confrontation with my catcallers, and so I found myself disrupting the usual back and forth, and so I would actually stop them and enter into a dialogue, and say, "So why do you think you have the right to say that to me?" And then he would sometimes, there was many different responses, but I think if I hadn't spoken up, Valentina, I knew what the next step was going to be, because I had lived with violence. And so if I did not defend myself, and I understood that violence is limited, right? But language opens up the possibility for exchange. So it was, I turned all these catcalling moments into these, I guess, kind of what we're doing this evening, right? Like engaging with your adversary. And for me, it was really, really empowering to be able to stop destructive behavior in the middle of the street, right? Because I had been trained, I had to do it at home, and then I did it in the street, right? So, and so this kind of taking back my ownership of my own agency in my own body, I developed a character called the Virgin Stripper, and I performed this piece in different places in the country. And what was fascinating, Valentina, is that there was never one time where I didn't perform that monologue and wasn't physically attacked. I started just making my awareness that the language, again, was so brutal and was calling out the rape culture, and I was, basically calling in my oppressor and my adversary in such a way that was very, they had not seen women, they were like, they hadn't seen women behave with this kind of, or take ownership of language in that way. Yeah. How do you develop statistic monologues for different characters? Yeah, that's a really, really, really wonderful question. I think one of the first questions I ask myself with characters is, what is their relationship to themselves? So a lot of times we think about female characters, we always think about, they're in relationship, most of the time female characters are in relationship to like their father or their husband, right? I always think about, what is their relationship to themselves and how does their inner thoughts sound like? And so when I start thinking about how do women actually talk to themselves, as I can usually try to find, I was like, oh, this is how this character would speak to herself. So now it's time to move into our first prompt, which is really, was my first prompt as a female playwright, was writing a poem or a monologue to your adversary with whom you have an unresolved relationship with. So I'd like for you to think of someone now who is an adversary, or maybe you haven't identified them yet as an adversary. This person could be a family member, could be an ex-partner, a friend, wink, wink, a politician, a past historical figure. Maybe this person is no longer with us, but you got beef. Basically, like, you got beef, and there's something that you cannot let go with this person, right? You are linked to this person. There's something you need to say. So this text that you will write could reflect what you were always too fearful to state or didn't have access to state. And I want you to imagine that your words are creating theatrical action momentum. my God. Okay, beautiful. So I guess we're going to transition to our second prompt. After that incredible fire first session. So our second prompt is now to write in the voice of your adversary. So you're going to be responding to your first monologue and poem, those that, you know, the ones, I'm sure the ones we didn't hear were incredible too. I'm just imagining. So now this is the exercising these theatrical muscles, where I always feel like how is it that we start to embody the voice of the characters that we are in conflict with, right? So how do we, you know, thinking about full dimension characterization, giving as much dimension to the adversary that you gave to yourself, right? So we're in this exercise. So I want you to maintain the urgency that you had in the first piece and that purpose in their response. So what would this adversary, the person that you were speaking to, what would their response be? So we'll take, believe like, yeah. And we'll be back at 6:52.
Voy Nazareno, oh, y la
that music is so wonderful. We're just getting into the rhythm. Wonderful. So I think we will move on to our third prompt. And we'll see how these two pieces come together. Okay, so our third prompt now is taking a look at these two pieces that you've written and creating a dialogue. So you'll select one line from each piece to be read in a call and response format. So you can easily just like take a look at monologue one, and then look at the adversary piece, and if you're writing on your computer, you could copy paste a line from your first monologue in your voice and a line from the adversary monologue. So it's your voice, adversary, your voice, adversary, your voice, adversary, to create a dialogue. Or what you could do as well, you could send me one of the pieces, and then I could read the dialogue with you as well. So I could read a line, and then you could read a line, or if you'd like to copy paste, you can do that as well. And to add another layer, like what I had in the opening of the La Paloma, there was some description of where the character was, right? That she was in darkness, but she was being lit up by the prison yard, right? And that there were sounds of birds flapping, right? So that we had some sort of sense of place. So I want you to imagine what theatrical space this dialogue can be in. So now, and it doesn't have to be realistic at all, right? So thinking about what does the afterlife look like? You know, are you in the afterlife in this dialogue with your adversary? So I want you to just play around with that, and we will be back at 7:05. And if you have any questions, I'll be answering in the chat as well. what an incredible sharing, all these different voices and all the themes and the different kind of specific dynamics and characters that came out from this. I mean, basically here you've already had the beginning of a play, right? You have the beginning of a full piece. And so I always call it like, almost like, I almost feel like when I do these exercises, I feel like I tricked everyone into writing a play. Like you didn't know you were gonna write a play, but then all of a sudden you have, you know, this, you have a piece. Beautiful, and I'm also curious to think about where your pieces were housed, you know, the spaces. Yes, I'm open to any questions. You said you plan to write 30 pages, also to perform them. Sure, absolutely. So I'll talk a little bit about the 33 plays. So about 15 years ago, I started writing a piece about two sisters that stow themselves away on a cargo ship. They're two sisters who are sex workers, getting themselves to France from the Dominican Republic. At the time, my brother was working in cargo ships, and they would find bodies on the bottom of these cargo ships, and they were immigrants who were basically boxing themselves up to getting to Europe or the United States. And so I was greatly haunted by this reality of what immigrants did. Also, my family immigrated to the United States through Costa Rica, through Guatemala, and then through Mexico. So I realized as I was writing these narratives that each of the relationships that I had, you know, in Miami, it was such a diverse reality. But for me, it was like being in Latin America, because I had friends that were from Ecuador, from Honduras, from Cuba, from Puerto Rico, from Nicaragua, from Costa Rica, right? And that every single one of our narratives had a very specific nuance. And I felt that in the United States, they just lumped all Latinos together, right? And I said, no, our history is so specific to the narratives of each of these countries. So when I started writing, I realized that all of these issues were interconnected, that the reason why people were trying to leave Dominican Republic was also because of the conditions that were connected to Haiti, and then how that connected to Cuba, right? So all of these histories, and I said, okay, this is a much larger project, and I realized that I needed to devote time, a piece for each country, and to see how those narratives were, you know, the histories were united. But then also I wanted to examine what was the relationship between, you know, specifically Mexico and the United States, and Nicaragua and the US, right? So looking at the relationships between all of the Latin American countries and the United States. So I have only written 8 out of the 33, and yes, it's true, writing, and then the development of these plays also involves performance, because I developed the writing by entering into workshops, doing community readings, doing workshops with actors, directors. So it's I know it's going to be a 40-year process, and I'm only 15 years in. So just to give you a little bit more, but on my website, you can find out more information on the Latin's America. I have information about all of the different plays that I have written so far. And oh, beautiful. Thank you so much, Raquel. So you're going to read more about the Latin's America project, because it is the concept that it is the Americas. We cannot, right? We cannot separate Latin America from the United States. It is the Americas, right? That's why the title of the play cycle is Latin is America. By 2050, the North America will hold more Spanish speakers than anywhere else in the world. So our future is Latin is America. So I'm writing to that future. could you give the mentees tips on how they should move forward their own writing journey? And then the writers that have influenced me, their own writing journey. I think writing as a young person, I think finding confidence in your own voice, if that means that you write on your own every day, but what I would always have is that you need a collective. I think if you have even one other person to hold you accountable, to share that story, because the thing about writing is that it's meant to be shared. And many times as a young writer, we need that reinforcement of being heard. So I always feel like if the mentees should be reading each other's work to one another, so that you can build on that momentum. I know myself as a young writer, I sometimes received really poor feedback from men, male professors, and it really shut me down. And I felt that being in supportive environments was incredibly important, and that I always had a book on me. You know what I'm saying? Writers, I feel like always be in relationship to writing, and then also be generating writing. So I felt that was the cycle that we should be in, is that, I say always have a book on you. Always have a list of 5 plays or 5 books or 5 things that you want to read. Always be thinking about, if you have something, a list together, and be like, wow, this month I want to focus on, reading these pieces. And I think it's really important as young writers to have someone else to hold you accountable. If you have a friend that says, did you write your pages this week? And so I didn't write my pages. Okay, right? Having someone else to bounce off of, I think is really wonderful, because we know how challenging it is to find supportive spaces. Women writers who have inspired, influenced you. Yes, today actually I was teaching in class on Maria Arin Fornes. Some of you may know her. She's, I think, she's a very unsung playwright in the American theater. She's Cuban. She came to the United States when she was 15, 16 years old, and she was really one of, oh yes, absolutely, Maria Irene Fornes. Everyone should read Mud, yes. Maria highly influenced me as a writer and as a maker. What I loved about Maria is that she directed her own work, and each one of her plays were such a specific world. She never limited herself, like, oh, you have a particular writing style. Maria challenged herself that every single play was a different world. It was a different style. Her plays were brutal, but yet beautiful, right? And so Maria Irene Fornes was really, I guess, a mentor to me. I met her when she was already quite ill, and she could not recognize. She had dementia. So, but even through her sickness, she continued to mentor the next generation of like female Latinx playwrights. Actually, I lit this candle today for Maria. I still have it burning for her. She recently passed over the last 2 years, and yeah, I immediately, I think I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her, right? She opened a path for Latinx women in the American theater, and I feel like I'm just, honored to be on the path that she carved, that she started for us. Incarcerated women you worked with, how much did art impact them while inside or outside, if you kept in touch, stuck out for you? Yeah, it's fascinating. I've been working in incarcerated spaces for 20 years. I also work a lot with young people. So I guess you heard Marilyn Torres earlier. So Marilyn and I we go to Rikers and we work with young men from the ages of 14 to 23. As well in December, last year in December, I performed La Paloma Prisoner at Rikers Island for a small group of women. And then what stories stuck out to me, I will tell one story that I will never forget, and I think it was the most beautiful piece of writing I have ever heard in my life. It was the first incarcerated setting I had went to. I went to a mental health incarcerated facility in Miami-Dade, and I sat in on a workshop of teenage girls in Miami, and there was a young girl who was 15 years old who was sentenced to 25 years for aiding and abetting her 21-year-old boyfriend. So you see the problem already? She's 15 and this guy's 21. And basically what she did was stand outside of a grocery store. All of a sudden the cops came and she had no idea what was happening inside. And so she immediately, as a 15-year-old, got tried as an adult. And when I heard she wrote this beautiful monologue about the image of strawberries sitting on a windowsill, and the wind coming in and blowing the curtains. And she said she looked at this beautiful white bowl with strawberries and says, "I will never know the taste of strawberries on a windowsill." That was almost 20 years ago. Her writing and her imagery, and it never left me. And I was a part of that. I was infuriated. I was infuriated that she was not. I was like, she should be writing. She should be writing poetry and writing plays and being supported. And instead, the system had put her into a situation that she was tried as an adult, when so clearly she had been taken advantage of by this older person. So I guess that's what continues to move me, and why I feel like what pulls me into those spaces, that public schools, shelters, community centers, prisons, jails, detention centers. I move to write in those spaces, right? I move to create language in those spaces. Some of the most complex writing I have ever heard has been by young people inside of Rikers. They create poetry like they can rhyme on the spot without even writing anything down. So yeah, this is what I think about. Yeah. Yes, I work with an organization called Pen America, and they have a series of books. I'm actually writing. I'm going to be contributing to one of the books now that highlights writing exercises and writing from women incarcerated women and incarcerated men. So I can get the link. It's Pen America actually has a series of writing from currently incarcerated folks and previously incarcerated people. So this is, yeah, it would be great for us to get the link. They have a program, and they have several books. They have an anthology of writing from that community, and I'm collaborating right now with Pen America on their newest book on writing exercises that were created in these facilities and writing that came out of this kind of work. But yes, Pen America does have several books from this community. Really stunning, beautiful work. Thank you so much for holding space for all of us. This was incredible, and I always go back to, I feel I have an immense privilege of being in circles with women my entire life, and I just felt like the circle got bigger, and I'm so grateful for this circle, and that just know that we are now all in community.